In order to honor everybody's time, I'll go ahead and start. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rabbi Michael Birnholz from Temple Beth Shalom in Vero Beach, Florida. And you are joining into the Union for Reform Judaism Small Congregation Rabbi Team Up program. We have been doing these collaborations going all the way back to Shavuot in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. And rabbis from small congregations came together and said, we can do some amazing programs working together. But we can use these virtual platforms to be able to join together, to be able to communicate with each other, to interact, and to share both the teaching and the learning together. And so that is what we have, the result of what we have done, that we now have this incredible opportunity to gather. We have had programs for Purim, we've had programs for Tisha B'Av, and Rabbi Vinikoor, you are now a co-host, so you should be able to do that. And so we have been having these incredible programs. Some of them are series like this, where each day of the festival of Sukkot, we are going to share a little bit of the Megillah of Sukkot, of Ecclesiastes, of Kohelet. And then for others, it'll be one shot. Like for Purim, we all gather to be able to do the study of the book of Esther, with different rabbis offering just a little piece of wisdom through. And I apologize with our phones ringing that it's part of small congregation life, that rabbis are sometimes the secretary, executive director, and occasionally the one who ends up taking out the trash too. It's the fun of being in a small congregation. So as we are here today, it is noon, so good afternoon from the East Coast. I know some of you are further in Europe, some of you are in California. We have people all over the place. So as you're coming in, please feel free. First of all, you're welcome to have your camera on. We do ask that you stay muted so that we are able to be able to carry on our discourse. But we will have some opportunities for you to offer your feedback as well. I'm gonna drop again one more time the link that should be able to, I'm just curious here. Yep, it should bring you into a web page that has the whole schedule. The schedule has not changed. The Zoom link is not going to change. It's the same Zoom link that brought you to us today. And so I'm going to turn it over for just a moment to my colleague and my compatriot for the day, to Rabbi Vinikoor, to give her a chance to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you, Rabbi Birnholz, for co-hosting this with me. It's really wonderful to celebrate Sukkot with all of you, and looking forward to the conversation. So thanks. I guess I should say I'm zooming in from Maine, from Bath, Maine, so you can see my sanctuary here, which is pretty nice. Here on the balcony of the sanctuary. I'm the part-time solo rabbi here at Beth Israel Congregation in Bath, Maine, and I also work with the Hillel students at Bowdoin College, which is about 10 minutes down the road. So yeah, thank you.
So it is wonderful that we have this opportunity to teach together. And if any of you were logging on expecting to see, which, yeah, the schedule did change. Rabbi Elizabeth Bahar in Macon, Georgia, was supposed to be here today. She was unable to be here. So I am joining in. And it just kind of fits with everything is vapor. Sometimes everything is, maybe it's all vanity. Every time you think you've got everything figured out, don't worry, it's Ecclesiastes. So I am going to start with a prayer for study. And of course, I have all sorts of stuff pulled up. So give me just a moment to share a screen with you. And so hopefully that worked. You can now see the screen. A few other just things to be aware of. There should be a raise hand function, which is a great way for letting us know if you have a question. You can also certainly use the chat as well. Those are both ways, good ways of letting us know if you have a question or an issue you would like to raise. You should see on your screen before you a blessing for study. And so we offer this blessing to remind us that this isn't just a literary study. This is actually Torah study. This is an opportunity for us to engage with the words of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We bless you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us holy through mitzvot and commands us to pay attention to the words of Torah. So once again, we are studying from Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of the Megillah, one of the scrolls, like Megillat Esther, that we study for Purim. This is the Megillah that we study for this festival of Sukkot. So Chag Sameach, everyone. Happy holiday, everyone. So we're enjoying our produce and the beginning of the rainy season in the land of Israel. And so yesterday we had an opportunity to start with chapters 1 and 2. Today, we will be working on chapters 3 and 4. There will be a video eventually posted that will allow you to go back and watch watch all of the previous classes or sessions that we've had. So when we say Ecclesiastes, when we say Kohelet, Kohelet is the author. And if you actually look up and say, who is Kohelet, you'll get a perfect Jewish answer, which is lots of answers. And as I often will say, the more times you get an answer, the more answers you get, the more you can be sure no one's quite certain what we're seeing. So here we have a text by someone named Kohelet. We don't know when it exactly is. There are all kinds of different theories that it's from the time of Solomon and that it was Solomon who's writing it. But this is something that's much later during the Greek era and is pulling on different kinds of Greek philosophies and theologies. There are all sorts of different answers. All we know is that we have this book of wisdom that is part of our canon, that's part of the Hebrew Bible, and that we are supposed to study it during this time of Sukkot. A couple of different themes, just so as we're going through this, is one of the things you're going to see is a lot of questions about free will, destiny. What do we have control over, what we don't, and who gets control and what's the impact of it? There's a beautiful concept in Judaism called this world and the world to come. This world is the world we live, the place and space we live in. The world to come is either like the Garden of Eden or the Messianic era, the time of the Messiah, this time of Shalom, and it's kind of a bubble around this world. Very often, if you ask Jews about the afterlife, they will say, oh, we don't believe in an afterlife. I have a responsibility for this world. The reality is there's a very healthy Jewish view of the afterlife. However, one of the things you'll see consistently is I can theorize, all I have control over is this world. And Ecclesiastes is very much a saying, I don't know, all I know is that I'm finite, that I'm mortal, that my end is going to come. What do I do in this world? And that leads us to some of those questions of how do you make sense of suffering? If everyone that gets born dies, what happens with suffering? What happens with success? And that's one of the questions we'll keep coming back to in Ecclesiastes is what is the point of success if eventually you're going to suffer? Or should my suffering then lead to some kind of success? There's a beautiful story that you're actually supposed to walk around with a piece of paper in your pocket. And one says that the world was created for my sake, and the other says, I am but dust and ash. So we'll talk about some of those different issues of success and of suffering and destiny and free will. And one of the other ones, and I had a great conversation with my dad. My father is a retired rabbi. He just retired a few years ago after a long career as in a congregation Shari Tzedek in Tampa. And he said he loves Ecclesiastes because of the cynicism and the negativity of it. And then I said, but wait, Dad, I think it's a challenge to that. And we had a discourse back and forth. And he said, look, it's all a text about Greek cynicism, about being cynical about the world. And I said, but what about the rabbinic nefemta? And so in Judaism, the rabbis will very often say, don't end on a negative, always find a way to propel it back to the positive. And so that will be one of those questions. Are we seeing the cynicism and the negative and the darkness? Or do we also see is there the possibility for the nefemta, the hope of here's what you take from it, here's the meaning of it, okay? So those are just a couple of different pieces to be considering. And one of the things that we will see is you're going to see some eternity and again, this world and the world to come. And we wanted to show you this because this is kind of what we're doing too, right? That are we talking about, we're talking on one level, Ecclesiastes, and what is Ecclesiastes saying? And on another level, we're saying, what do we understand from Ecclesiastes looking back from our point of view? For example, Psalm 90, again, text from the Torah, from the Hebrew Bible, from writings, from Psalms. The days of our years are 70, or by reason of strength 80 years, but 1,000 years in God's sight, or is but yesterday once past, a watch in the night. God sees the whole big picture. God knows everything that's going to happen. We only get a tiny, tiny slice of it. And so we've got to work in that tiny slice. And you see in Pirkei Avot, you see in the wisdom of the sages, this is from the book from Mishnah, which is 200 in the around 200 in the Christian era, quoting Rabbi Akiva. And he said, everything is foreseen, yet free choice or free will is granted, and the world is judged with goodness. So you have that same kind of thing as there's destiny, there is everything is foreseen. We'll see some of that language in Ecclesiastes, but we have in our tiny slice, we have some control, we have some free will. And so those are just some of the things to consider as we're getting into it. And so before we really jump into chapter 3, I wanted to turn it back to Rabbi Vinikoor. I didn't know if you had some kind of opening things for us to consider before we jump into chapter 3.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll do the Hevel piece. So again, there in chapter 1 and 2, actually right away in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2, we're introduced to this Hebrew word Hevel, Hey Vet Lamed, which, if you know the famous phrase, vanity of vanities, right? Hevel Havelim. And so I took a minute to look at, well, what exactly is this word Hevel? What is the translation vanities? And what does the word Hevel really mean? And where else is it found in Torah, if at all? So I'm going to share my screen. Had a moment, brain freeze. It's been a while since I've shared my screen. There we go. So everyone should be able to see. I'm bringing you to Genesis 4, verse 1 through 7, which is the story of Cain and Abel. And this is the first time that we see the word Hevel. Hevel is Abel. It's Abel's name in Hebrew. You can see it right here. Now the human knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. She then bore his brother Abel. So here it is. I'm just going to highlight it. Hevel. Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. Cain brings an offering of the soil. Abel brings an offering of his choicest flock. God accepts Abel's offering, Hevel's offering, and doesn't pay heed or doesn't accept as willingly Cain's offering, and this distresses Cain. So let me just get to this part here. Vayomer Adonai el Cain, Lama chara lach velama naflu panecha. And Adonai said to Cain, why are you distressed? And why is your face fallen? Surely if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Probably crouches at the door. Its urge is towards you, yet you can be its master. So I wanted to bring you both this kind of conversation between Cain and God and this observation that Hevel is Abel, the name Abel, because it fits with this theme that Rabbi Birnholz is bringing up. To what extent are our actions, right? To what extent are our actions free will and we are our master of our actions, that last part here? And to what extent is the path already laid out for us as individuals, as communities, and we don't have control. And I think as people of faith, as Jews, we're always navigating that tension. Comes up in Ecclesiastes, and I wanted to bring this other text to bring it up here. And then again, this idea that Abel, I'm going to show it to you in the story here. It's with a hey. I misspelled it down at the bottom of the sheet. Hey vet lamed. So it's translated traditionally as vanity of vanities, but it really has this sense, and you can almost hear it in the Hebrew, of breath, of vapor. So this kind of ephemeral breathiness, it's there, but it doesn't have the kind of solid foundation that a rock or other kind of long-standing things have. It comes in and out. I saw a hand. Thea.
Yeah, the newer translations translated as futile or futility,
Yes.
which is your vapor concept, but futile has a different feeling to me. So what are your thoughts about that translation?
Right. Futile has this sense of it has a negative connotation, would you say?
Yes.
As opposed to breath. Breath to me has a very positive connotation, an essential connotation, right? Yeah, it's interesting. I've also seen that translation, and that may even be the one that I'm bringing you when we look at chapter 4 in a little bit. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
yeah, go
and
ahead.
I would say no, I would say that's exactly where we're sitting as we're reading and talking about Ecclesiastes. Are we talking about something that's ephemeral that we're trying to hold on to, like our breath? Are we talking about futility and vanity? And so that's that question between cynicism and nechemta of how do you read it? Do you read it with the negative or do you read it with the positive? And I'm a gardener, so I look at Cain is the one who's growing plants, and Rabbi Vinikoor, you said a rock, right? There's Cain, and then you have Abel, who's the one who's the flock. And think about, how do you ever define where your flock is? Because what does sheep do? They're always on the move, right? You know where the flock is, but they're always in motion around you. And I just that kind of image of the two of them in contrast is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do when you count sheep? You fall asleep.
Thea, to answer your question, I mean, it would be interesting to take even a deeper look at the word Hevel.
I'm part of a certain group, and we were comparing and contrasting the 1903 or 1907 JPS from the new gender sensitive JPS. We had them side by side, and it wasn't just the gender issue. The words have let me clarify, the translations have changed. And for chapters 1 and 2, everything, no matter what you amass, no matter how hard you work, it's all futile. And when I read that, as opposed to what I read years ago, was vanity, it's sort of when you think about, even if it is Solomon or David, or they amassed all this wealth around themselves, did they amass it for vanity, or does it not matter? Is it futile? Just my 2 cents.
No, it's great. Thank you. Rabbi Birnholz, do you want to take folks through chapter 3?
So yes. So yesterday we talked about chapters 1 and 2. Today we are going to take you starting into chapter 3, at least so you can see the text. They are all trying to find me right in this moment. So, you should see in front of you now the text of Ecclesiastes 3. I won't sing it. There's a reason I'm a rabbi, not a cantor. But it should be pretty familiar to you with the melody, the song version of this from the Birds. That there is everything. There is a season, a time for every experience under heaven. Again, you'll come to lots of different translations of it. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And I know there are actually more verses that are there. There's also different translations, right? A time to be time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting, for doing the uprooting, for doing the tearing out. And so you'll see those back and forth, that back and forth. And so I am curious as I look out to the group, and you're welcome to respond by chat. If there is one of these that really catches your attention, that you find yourself doing this one more than others. And I know that as I mentioned, I do a lot of gardening, that time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, that there are, how many times I've gone out to plant when I actually have to stop and tear something out in order to make space for something. Or as I'm tearing out, I then have to decide, wait, am I going to leave this? And you get some incredible things where you get remnants. I've taken out an etrog tree and moved an etrog tree, and every time I go to look, another shoot from the roots has come forward. So I'm curious if there are, for you as you're here, if there's one of these that becomes one of the pieces that you either wrestle with or that you really truly love. As I look out to the group, I'm assuming this is a fairly familiar text. So Cody says, try not to hate. So there's is that even on my list? A time to love and a time to hate. And there's the whole practice of Musar, which says there are times where you're going to hate something and times when you're going to love something. And you have to find that right balance of it. Okay, so and Hope is throwing in a time to grieve and a time to dance. Those two are paired together. I don't know if Hope wants to speak more to that.
I can. I'm a firm believer in dance it out. And I'm kind of a high anxiety person. And so a little bit of grieving and a lot of dancing out.
So using dance as a way of getting your body moving again.
And expressing your emotions in a positive way.
And Helena's is jumping in with the grieve and dance as well. I don't know if you want to add to that, Helena.
I I think it's interesting that they're contrasted here, because my rabbi speaks a lot about holding two things within ourselves at the same time, or that we're meant to carry all emotions at all times. And so to me, I grieve and I dance at the same time, and we talk a lot about that. So to me, that they're not contrasts; they're like coexisting, I guess.
And I often will say that how many times in Judaism that we are tempted to, when we're tempted to laugh, we end up crying, or when we're tempted to cry, we end up laughing. And that is just a powerful part of Judaism, that we sometimes end up doing either contradictory things or paradoxical things, or that we need one state to move us out of another. So Anna was making a comment about downsizing, and the time to keep and a time to discard. And Anne, it's interesting, you said you're in a state of time of life when it's time to discard. And then I start thinking about my 22-year-old, and they moved out of college and went to India for the year, and what they talked about, how they had to give everything away because they couldn't travel with it, and they are not in a settled place. And so they are really downsizing because they don't have a place to store things. And Nora is chiming in with a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Nora, I don't know if you want to speak to that or keep silent on that.
For me, it's more just like times when I can speak to things that I've noticed like going wrong, or times when it's like really not in my place, and like maybe I'm part of the group that is benefiting from the injustice. So really just like when to like be an ally, and when it is a problem that I need to bring up.
So what you're saying, and what I was hearing from the earlier people, is trying to find that right rhythm in yourself between the dancing and the grieving, or from the giving and the letting go. Nora, you just brought up a whole different element of it, which is really beautiful, which is, how do I figure out what is the rhythm around me, and then matching my rhythm and how I move through the world, and which of these states I'm in with what is happening. Paula, you're bringing forward an element of this, which I think is very much fitting with Ecclesiastes. How do you discard some beliefs? What does it mean to discard beliefs, or to let go of relationships, right? And this is kind of what we're seeing in Ecclesiastes of, wait, what do I value? How am I spending my time? Is it on the physical stuff? Is it on the spiritual stuff? So thank you all for chiming in with this. This is part of what we're gathering today, is to not just to look at these words. And I think that's part of the beauty of Ecclesiastes, of giving us these words. And you can look at the whole book of Ecclesiastes, or even just into or even just to focus on one particular verse, or one set of verses. Rabbi Dantowitz, no one should be waiting for the host, because there is no waiting room. So everybody has just been coming in. So she might have the wrong link. And then somebody else, a few others said, so Terry joined in, leads me to the present, not to worry about which may occur, but to live and enjoy today. And it's very much the kind of the theme that you see. You also see, and so after this section of Ecclesiastes, after the a time to be born and a time to die, there's this whole incredible discussion about human versus beast, right? That there is humans, and in contrast to the animals, are we something more than animals in how we move through the world and what happens to us? Is our spirit somehow higher, that I should give myself more value than the animals, or should I just give into my animal instincts? And one of my favorite debates, my favorite machloket that you might come across, is, do you slice your challah or tear your challah? I'm curious. Are you a challah slicer or a challah tearer?
Both.
I've got both, right? And so you see this, and do we give into just like ripping the challah apart? And if you tear it, here's the challenge, right? I love tearing. I'm very much a terror of challah. But then if you tear up the challah, then it's hard to then get it to slice so that you then have it nice for your French toast, whether it's for Shabbat morning or Sunday morning or whenever you're going to have your challah French toast. As Rabbi Vinikoor says, it's a time for tearing and a time for slicing. Oh. If I missed a comment, just realize I'm seeing these as they spin by. So, Judith, I'm now getting back to see yours. You said it was a familiar, I ran into an interesting translation. It speaks of moments as opposed to time. It captures the ephemeral quality. So moments of birthing and moments of dying seem powerful to me as I get older. So as opposed to a time, the translation of moments, which is absolutely fascinating and beauty. And that's one of the thanks. Thank you for calling attention to it, of these different translations and these different ways of working it through. There's one translation, and as you said, in the time of your life, at different days and different moments, reading these with different translations, or even reading the Hebrew with different eyes, gives us different insights. So my apologies for missing that. Realize I'm getting lots of different ones, different comments. COVID slicing. Okay, so yeah, so the argument against tearing is that in fact you're tearing like a beast, as opposed to why you would tear and not slice with challah is because of that we are civilized, or that that you're not going to, the knife is a weapon of war, and so we want to not use a tool like that on Shabbat, and that you're just going to tear it and it's more organic. So again, if I miss a comment, just realize I'm getting lots of different comments, which is absolutely wonderful. You can also please feel free to use the raise hand function. That lets me see that somebody has made a comment, especially if I'm not seeing everybody on screen. So it's just hard to keep track of everybody. We're doing the best we can, and how awesome it is that we are able to gather in this space. So I'm going to wrap it up from chapter 3 and turn it back over to Rabbi Vinikoor to give us some of chapter 4.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I love this conversation, especially with the chapter 3, which really looks at or presents in a certain way that it's almost like two poles, right? A time for birthing and a time for dying. And it feels very kind of black and white. And I think you all have illuminated that. I think a reading of it as more of the gray and the mixing of the two times, the two zmanim, is really beautiful. And I think relatable for all of us, I hope. So chapter 4, as opposed to chapter 3, which has that first section that is written in that very repetitious way, about comparing. Chapter 4, I actually went through, so it's 17 verses, and I went through and I tried to kind of outline it for you all so you get a sense of where Kohelet is going in chapter 4. So let me just show you what I've got here. Okay, so I chunked it out into about 4 different sections of the 17 verses. So the first, Kohelet talks about suffering and the persistence of evil despite good actions. That's part 1 in this chapter. Part 2, he talks about work and what makes for useful work. Part 3, he looks at collaboration. I'm going to go into more detail, but just to give you a sense. So this middle part looks at collaboration. Part 4 looks at status and wealth. And then part 5 is just one line ending with a call for obedience to God, which is interesting. So I actually want to, I think just given our timing, maybe focus on this middle section here that I'm calling collaboration. Whereas the beginning part of chapter 4, as well as the ending part of chapter 4, have what feels more characteristically Kohelet's cynicism, negativity, doubt about the purpose of life. This middle section, verses 7 through 12, have a little bit more of a, I don't want to say positive. Kohelet's not very positive, but has more of an optimistic take on life. So I'm just going to read it to you. And I have noted this further. Actually, I'm going to read it from my Chumash here. It's easier for me to see, but it's up on your screen as well. And I have noticed this further futility under the sun. The case of the man, the case of the person who is alone, with no companion, who has neither son nor brother. Yet he amasses wealth without limit, and his eye is never sated with riches. For whom now is he amassing it while denying himself enjoyment? That too is a futility and an unhappy business. Two are better off than one, in that they have greater benefit from their earnings. For should they fall, one can raise the other. But woe betide him who is alone and falls with no companion to raise him. Further, when two lie together, they are warm. But how can he who is alone get warm? Also, if one attacks, two can stand up to him. A threefold cord is not readily broken. So we get these themes about wealth and status and what is the purpose of amassing wealth for one's own benefit. Can you even derive happiness from material wealth, right? This has been a theme of Kohelet. But then I think these really beautiful ideas that it actually isn't about one person building a palace for themselves. It's actually about needing one another. So verse 9, two are better off than one. And then, right, Kohelet brings this kind of very practical. They can raise each other up. They can keep each other warm. They can protect each other. So to me, that was kind of a light amidst some of the more cynical elements of the book. Anyone want to react to this idea or comment on that before I go on? Interesting. So, okay, so this idea about kind of offspring or children, whether they're biological children or youth that we take on as people that we want to foster for the future. Right. So, that is later in this section that I'm summarizing as youth, status, and wealth. Kohelet talks about, what does it mean to have a future ahead of you? And can you change? If you're poor, you can become perhaps better off. If you have some years ahead of you. So interesting. Anyone else? Nice. So true wealth is from family and friends. Money cannot buy happiness. Beautiful. Right. And that's essentially what he's saying there. Right. Verse 8, someone who's amassing, surrounding themselves with things, but not surrounding themselves with community, family, friends. Nora.
Kind of going off that as well, like to me it kind of speaks to like what are your motivations. So like if you're doing these things just for yourself, like to put yourself above everyone else, it's not as like meaningful as if you're doing it for the good of the community.
Nice. Beautiful. So that our outlook as one of kind of sharing our riches, whether they're actually material riches or our energy and our time in the service of others and the community and the future, even if we're not going to be part of that future, because we won't be. We won't be alive forever. And I think he's grappling with that as well. We refer to our temple as a family. Most of us are transplants. Beautiful. Right. So for many of us, that's the Jewish community is our two are better than one. Right. And we invest in the Jewish community towards a better future for those that come after us. Beautiful. United we stand, divided we fall. Beautiful. So, Rabbi Birnholz, should I move to the poem? Okay. So, I think it's on your study sheet, actually. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing. So again, any one of these chapters, we could spend, several hours really digging into them, but I hope that you got a little bit of a flavor of chapter 3, which is kind of the famous musical setting that we all know, chapter 4, and I wanted to highlight the this kind of beautiful, maybe more optimistic take, since we don't get a lot of that in Kohelet. And then I wanted to bring you this poem that is originally written in Hebrew by the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. He is doing what I love about many modern poets, as well as other poets as well, but he's building on the Ecclesiastes text and in conversation with Kohelet. So I want to bring it to you because I think it's very thought-provoking, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about it a little bit. So in the Hebrew, it's called Adam Bechayav, which means a man in his life. A man in his life has no time to have time for everything. He has no room to have room for every desire. Ecclesiastes was wrong to claim that. A man has to hate and love all at once, with the same eyes to cry and to laugh, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, make love in war and war in love, and hate and forgive and remember and forget, and order and confuse and eat and digest, what long history does in so many years. A man in his life has no time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins forgetting. and his soul is knowing and very professional. Only his body remains an amateur, always. It tries and fumbles. He doesn't learn and gets confused, drunk and blind in his pleasures and pains. In autumn, he will die like a fig, shriveled, sweet, full of himself. The leaves dry out on the ground, and the naked branches point to the place where there is a time for everything. So I'd love to hear just kind of some initial thoughts, initial reaction, what stands out to you from this poem and its conversation with Kohelet. Thea, do you want to go first, and then we'll take a look in the chat as well.
Well, what I wanted to do first was to ask Rabbi Birnholz if he can send this to us, because this is stunning. And I really want to thank you all for sharing this. I really like it. And there's a I don't know, I can't even explain the feeling of peace that I felt when you were reading.
Beautiful.
So that's my 2 cents.
The link to the PDF in the Google Drive has just been shared, so you should be able to see it now.
Beautiful. Thank you, Thea. Marie, do you wanna comment on the last line? You wrote that it's, yeah. Oh no, thank you. Okay. So yeah, so others, let me look in the, thanks for adding though that you think it's beautiful. Yes. Yeah. Rabbi Jantowitz, right. Life is full of contrasts. So I mean, I think he's in conversation with Ecclesiastes. You know, it's so bold to say Ecclesiastes was wrong. I kind of like that, right? It kind of wakes you up. Oh, okay, you're going to challenge the biblical text. Great, let's see what you have to say. And I think he's very beautifully, as you've reflected, saying some of what we all said, right? It's not the poles that is necessarily presented, but it is much more, life is much more complicated. And then he really gets at this piece that I think is so important for the high holidays, right? Coming out of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and into Sukkot. This idea about time and what is a lifespan of a human being? How do we spend our time? Do we ever have enough time? What do we do with the time that we have? And then this idea that ultimately we will be returned to the earth, and perhaps that is the place where there is time for everything. Kind of a sad ending, but I think very, very true.
And yet there's also the chutzpah of him declaring that Ecclesiastes is wrong. Which, by the way, is very common in Jewish commentary, that you have Ibn Ezra who declares Rashi's wrong all the time. Really, 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 really beautiful. I keep thinking about that idea that a man in his life has no time for everything, right? That there's no way to do this, and yet, if you've read that beautiful book by John Green, The Fault in Our Stars, he talks about the infinity that exists between 0 and 1. Judith earlier had brought up that idea of moments, right? And here you have that you can make love in war and war in love, which again is such beautiful language, that even as there is no time, that no person has time for everything, how much do we pack in those one little moment of all of these things all at once. That is really just pretty amazing. And it is Rabbi Vinikoor said this is just the beauty of Amichai, that here is this secular Israeli Jew who's trying to create this new poetry and new language, and yet all he does is keep going back to theology. He keeps going back to Jewish and Hebrew texts to draw out these theologies and philosophies, which is pretty extraordinary. And then Rabbi Goldman Wartel, who's I think teaching on Thursday, asks the question, do the naked branches point to the earth or to the sky?
I love that. I'm glad that you asked that, Rabbi Goldman Wartel. Yeah, actually, I don't know why I was picturing the branches like drooping down and maybe thinking about the shriveled leaves on the ground, autumn and the leaves falling, but it's beautiful. I love the idea that perhaps they're pointing to the sky. It also makes me think of the lulav and kind of where we're pointing the lulav at this time of year.
So I saw, Anne, you had a hand up, and just one point about figs, which are really interesting, that when they shrivel and die, and I love shriveled, sweet, and full of themselves, that comes spring and sitting there on the fig tree, if you have ever seen a fig tree, you already can see the buds for next year's fruit and next year's branches. Even when it shrivels up, there is something there. Go ahead, Anne.
I just kept thinking about my fig tree. A lot of them point up. And the leaves smell so good when they're on the ground.
And so any other thoughts as we give you a little bit of, we go from Ecclesiastes. Remember, I said we were going to go, you start with with Psalm 90, which says that that we're only a little fragment of the finite in the midst of the infinite. And then yet you have Rabbi Akiva says, yeah, but you still have control in your finite. So we go from Ecclesiastes, from Psalms to Mishnah and Talmud, that here we're Ecclesiastes, and now we're going to Amichai, and the argument goes back and forth, very much like there's a time for every experience. There's a time to sit with the words, with the keva on the page, and then there's a moment for this kavanah, for this intention. How are we going to use it? That there's a moment for what is the physical stuff I'm able to accumulate, and then what is the hevel, whether it's the vapor or ephemeral or the theological, what's that kavanah, that intention that I'm bringing to it? And so I'm going to turn it back over to Rabbi Vinikoor, and I'm going to post one more time on the schedule for the remainder of the week.
Wonderful. Yeah, so we just wanted to close with some words of blessing for the rest of the holiday. I'm just going to make this so I can see you all. But I'm so grateful to Rabbi Birnholz for hosting this and for collaborating. Grateful to all of you for your thoughts and input as we study these texts together, and want to offer a blessing to you all in the remaining days of Sukkot. We're really just at the beginning of this festive holiday, this time of our rejoicing, this time of gratitude for the harvest and the fruits that we've harvested, both vegetables and fruits, but also our learning, our commitments to community and to family that we've fostered. And so gratitude for all the work that you've put in to reach this very moment. And so may you all be blessed with joy and balance, a sense that there is time for everything, as Amichai challenged us with, and for more study this week with some amazing rabbis from across the country. So Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach, everyone. And thank you to Rabbi Vinikoor for, actually, I guess I was the one teaming up with you today. It is wonderful you're here. Tomorrow's session will be at 2 p.m. Eastern. That we have Rabbi Rebecca Epstein and Rabbi Faith Joy Dantowitz, who will be working with chapter 5 and 6. And again, tomorrow's will be at 2 p.m. Eastern. and we're just trying to make sure we really balance it to give opportunities for people in different times. And later today, I'm hoping that we will have the videos of earlier sessions up and available, so you'll be able to see this session and also then others. One of the other questions I keep getting from folks is that can we bring a group? If we do a lunch and learn, can we gather with our lunch and learn group? And the answer is absolutely. And this isn't just for folks from small congregations, but we want to make sure these programs are open for folks from small congregations. But if you have other friends from other communities that you would think would appreciate doing this, please feel free to join in. This is just a wonderful opportunity for collaboration and for learning together. And with that, thank you. Chag Sameach, everyone.